Okay, well, the game is Clippers. Um, and no, it's not about cutting counters. It's actually a re-implementation of Santa Fe. Now, I've played Santa Fe and Union Pacific in the past. I barely remember them, but I loved the the placement aspect that comes up with the game, where you start laying down the roots. And from what I can tell, the two games are almost exactly the same, except for in one of them you get to choose which companies, or I think which companies you have, and in the other one you get them kind of randomly dealt, or something like that. Well, this particular game, that's why I'm awake right now. We got these painters outside, and they woke me up early. I'm actually doing this just before work. I think this guy's gonna explode on 10. Yeah. Okay. So. Anyway, one of the big factors with this game is, instead of companies being the commodity that like players control to win the game more or less, this one uses island locations. And what we see here is a map of the South Pacific with particular islands, and there's going to be little spaces on those islands, and you can barely see them, which are filled with these little circles, which indicate one player or another. A player is a nationality, apparently. Most of them are fairly distinguishable. My first game we played, I played with my wife. I played this once before, and we played the UK and the Americans. And to tell you the truth, this and this are a little hard to distinguish. Everything else they tried to make pretty clear. What else would you use from? I don't know. Maybe a white star as the U.S. on a blue background would have been better than trying to use the flags there. I know they used flags for everyone else, but playability-wise, that's kind of an effect. Okay, so in this game, you're not going to be controlling actual companies, and let's take a look at first, let's take a look at what the victory conditions are as they were. The victory conditions come down, and they're fairly simple. You start off with some of this money here, and I don't know what you get. A few bucks, $4, $5, I don't know, something like that each. I should have set that up already. But that's what you start the game with, but each buck that you have at the end of the game is worth a victory point. And this is different. For example, I know in Union Pacific, the money is just your score. You can't spend it. Well, in this, you can spend the money, which makes it kind of more, there's more choice involved in it, because things have a cost directly in victory points, I guess. But anyway, money that you collect, which you get by hooking things up, and I believe that's the same in all the games, goes into your treasury, and you can use it. You could also save it for victory points. And then the other thing that gives you victory points is how many of these little flags you got, times the value of the location, times the number of trains, boat routes that go through it. And so you have this kind of multiplier effect. You've got up to 10 of these little markers. They can be worth 8 each in terms of the islands. And you could have, I don't think you could have all 6 companies running through it, but you could easily have 3 or 4 companies connected to one of those. With 3 companies connected, you're talking 24 points a port you have in that area. So it looks like the majority of your points are going to come off of what you lay as track or as routes. It really is unfortunately not as well connected for me. Rails make a lot more sense than these clipper ships. But there's some interesting little differences here which people who are more familiar with the other games, UP and Santa Fe, are going to be able to catch. Let's look at what the rules are like completely. So what happens is each player gets their own step in a turn, or their own steps in a turn. And, you know, honestly, yes, first player, yeah. At the beginning of the game, somebody has this anchor which says they are the first player. And that's going to rotate throughout the game, so it doesn't stay on one person, because there are advantages to going first. I don't know if there's a terrible advantage in this game to where you sit, although there is definitely some effect. If you're trying to go in one direction and the guy after you wants to take that same shipping line in a different direction, you're going to be in trouble. But let's look at the rules. So the game's broken into 4 phases, or each game turn, and each player in order takes... Each phase is done by each player, and then we move on to the next phase, starting with the first player, and in my case we'll be working counterclockwise, as I always like to do. I don't know which way that little anchor's passed. I kind of like games where it's passed in the opposite direction of the rest of the game. And that does not seem to be the case. It seems to be you would pass it left clockwise, so I'll be passing it right counterclockwise, just as I'm passing the turn in that direction. So you don't shift as dramatically, perhaps. Okay. So let's look at what you can do in phase 1. And at this point, you're allowed to make a choice of placing one of your port markers that isn't placed on the map yet. Okay? And you can place it in any empty circle. And there are a lot of empty circles. Some of them are worth a lot of points. So, you know, obviously this is going to be worth more than placing it on some doinker over here. It's pleasant, isn't it? Yeah, that's how my life's been the last 3 days. Just constant noise going on here. And I gotta work through this one. Alright, okay, back to the game. Alright, so you can place one of your port markers there, and obviously you want to get these all out, and you want to get them into valuable places, but choosing where they're valuable is not something you can really make that decision at the beginning of the game, necessarily. But they're a commodity, which means if someone chooses to do that early on and grab an 8 space, you may not be able to get to that 8 space early in the game if you don't also choose, you know, such a thing. All the good point spaces may fill up. It's possible, I think, even in the 2-player game, for a lot of these to get filled. There are 4, 8, 12, 16, 28 spaces along the left-hand side of the board. There's 4 more over here. The 20 that are along the left-hand side of the board are kind of the ones that you can link together. Going to Hawaii, yay, is something that you could waste a spur of your shipping route on, but it's not something that goes any further. Now, Hawaii is an easy payoff that you can hold on to, and it's kind of attractive because of that, especially for the red line. You can just shoot in there fairly easily. Although what's funny, in my wife and my game, we both put 2 counters each in Hawaii, so it became valueless. Nothing went there. And she managed to get the jump on me there by pulling a counter out at exactly the last turn. Alright, so you do one of 3 things in phase 1. One of them is placing the port markers, or you can take one of these cards, and these cards each have different abilities, mainly that affect you during phases 2 and 3. I'll go over them in a moment, but taking one of those option cards, and you have to pay for most of them, is instead of placing a port there. And then the third option you have is to pass, which if you don't want to grab an option card and you don't want to place a port, makes sense. In general, though, the option cards, at least in the two-player game, were incredibly valuable. But when we look at these, we'll see that may not be so much the case in the five-player game. So the one that's really valuable is this ×2 one. It costs you $2 to buy during your turn. And what it does is it allows you to lay 1 or 2 route segments in phases 2 and 3 and get double bonuses. We'll see what that means when we hit phases 2 or 3, but normally you lay 1 route token and you get normal bonuses. So you're getting double the money back when you make bonuses here. These guys, there's 3 of. There's 1 of each of the others. The ×3 one doesn't cost you anything. It lets you lay up to 3 route segments, any 1, 2, or 3. You can never lay 0 with these, or on your normal turn, on both phases 2 and 3, but you get no bonuses. That's kind of unpleasant. You want to make money, and bonuses are money. And then that is the thing that gives you the most lays, 6 route lays, and it costs nothing. The 5 times only costs $1. It lets you lay up to 5 route segments in either phase 2 or 3, but you don't get to lay any route segments in the other phase, and you get normal bonuses for that. Okay, so these are going to modify what you can play, sort of how good, how fast you can play, and what kind of money you get back. And then the final one is the port. This costs $4, and in phase 2 or 3, it allows you to shift one of your port tokens. So for example, if you're somewhere you don't like the points for, you could just move it over somewhere else. Now, until you have your ports laid down on the board, this isn't very valuable, and I would say this is a risky and expensive action to take until the routes are already kind of traced out enough that you know this is a good upgrade, and I'm not going to want to move out of here later. I'm not going to find a better upgrade later. So I think that generally gets taken at the end of the game. Let me take a pause here because I want to look something up. I'm not sure how the port marker affects, and we made a quick ruling in our game, how it ends up affecting your route lay. So yeah, looking at the rules, it doesn't clarify. All it says is your advantage with the port marker is that you get this. I'm going to go with because I don't like to look things up online if I can avoid it, I'm going to go with what we played with, which was, hey, you still get your normal lays. It doesn't specify that you don't. 5X card specifies you don't get to lay anything in one of those 2, and you get to lay 5 in the other. This one just doesn't say it, and it doesn't say it replaces all your abilities. So we'll leave it as it is. It's an advantage. It's got no disadvantage listed. I think the others have disadvantages listed in the rules. Yeah, there's no disadvantage, no penalty. So I assume you can play as normal. All right. Those are your options, but in addition to whatever you choose there, you can pay $3 to grab one of these if it's available. Now these are just kind of kicking around. They're extra ship markers, and you'll see how they work, but they allow you to do a bit of branching. Although maybe not as impressive as one would hope. Okay. Now, phase 2 and 3 are exactly the same. What happens here is, starting with the first player, in general, you get to grab a line of a company and put it on one of these little markers, and you move the ship marker, and you have to start from the starting location on the first one, up to align with the route you're just laying out. And as you continue on, you'll be moving through different territories, and you always have to extend from where the ship is. Now, let me find the one little exception to that is if you have a ship marker already in your hand. Let me look this up to make sure I get this right. If you have a ship marker in your hand, you're allowed to branch off from any island. So if this was already done and I have this in my hand, I could either start from here, or I could say go this way. And I mark it with a new ship marker. And now there's 2 lines coming out of this company. And everybody can extend either one. Companies aren't associated with a player, so anybody can be extending a particular company. And quite often, one company does quite well in terms of getting its routes built, while others are languishing. Each of the companies also has a different number of markers. So that ranges from the low of 18 to the high of 30. Well, actually, Purple's a special company. They don't have any ships, and we'll handle them in a moment. And they're smaller. They only have 13. That limits the size that the company can expand on. So some of these are going to be mightier. Now, because these companies aren't terribly associated with anything, historical, unlike UP at the very least, and I think Santa Fe as well, there isn't this real feel like there was with the rail games. I don't know. There's a little less flavor to the theme because these are just kind of abstracted. Oh yeah, I'm the black company. What is that? I don't know. Rails are a very strong evocative response, and in addition to that, they have a tie to something that you can look back and say, oh yeah, that's historically accurate. In this case, I don't know, because I don't think any of these clipper ship companies are actually based on any of these locations that are shown. Most of the clipper ship companies were based out of more, they weren't simply trading in the South Pacific to begin with. So like the American clipper ship companies would go to the South Pacific, but the clipper ship was so fast, they wanted it to travel across the wide expanses of the oceans. That was the more important part, not the inter-island trading, which could be fairly, mundane. So on that side, I think this game does a great disservice. I don't think it's terribly important what your routes are within the islands, and I don't really feel like these set trading routes necessarily make a lot of sense in terms of linking the player to the theme. But it's also not unbelievable in the sense that once the clipper ship does arrive, perhaps certain patterns of trade, etc., you want to control the markets where they're coming. It's just a different flavor, and one that I think is a little weaker. Okay. We had to talk about something else here in phase 2 and 3. Ah, yes, bonuses. So when you cause the first company to hit an island, like in the example we had, well, let's take a different one. Let's take a smaller one. Say you make this connection, which you can do without any cards, without anything special. You get $2. Now, if you're that's not a great choice. Let's say we went this way. You get $2. If you're the second company If you bring the second or later company in here, you get $1. And that is your bonus. And every additional company, when it first hits there, generates the person who lays the root there $1. Now, if your bonuses are doubled, you double those bonuses. If they don't exist, you don't get them. And it's pretty simple. And this is just cash you're going to get out of the bank here, which you can spend, remember, on these cards, on buying clipper ships. Okay. Now, and they're worth victory points at the end of the game. One special little feature is what happens when you land here. Now again, here I had to kind of interpret the rules. They weren't absolutely clear on this, and I'm sure there's an online ruling somewhere or another about any question like this. This is an old enough game. But once one company comes to American Samoa, the purple company's been launched. Now the purple company is allowed to build out of American Samoa as many times as it likes. That's not terribly clarified, though. The front is never specified. It has no clipper ship. What's not stated here is that, and I think this is a corollary, once I make it to Western Samoa, I can split out of here too. Why is this necessary? Well, because there's no ship on here. There's no, this is the front location. No, we tried playing and it wasn't terrible. Where, yeah, you could only extend out of each once. I don't think that makes sense because there is no ship to mark that. And if you ended up with a circular route somehow, let's take how do I know what my ordering is? Do I know that I went here and here, in which case I can only build out of Western Samoa? Or did I go here and here, in which case I can only, etc. And because of that ambiguity, I think you have to allow them to split at any island without a ship, which is fair enough. They don't have a lot of pieces, and they're mainly a spoiler from the way the rules describe them. We didn't see them that way. We saw them actually as very little of anything, because they came very late in the game. So, let me think what else there is here. There's a bunch of rules preventing you from doing stuff that's totally dicky. For example, there are arrows here so that only red can use this. Arrows coming out of here so only green and white can use those. Essentially, you have to go in the direction of the arrow in those cases. You can't build part way and then someone else build part way so that neither of you can use that line. The other person can, of course, build here on this other line. You can't take both lines on a route to an island. All kinds of little things like that. However, the game is still incredibly dicky in terms of track length, route length. You have this real capacity to bend the other person's desires with a company. They want to go in one direction, you want to go in another, or you just don't want them going where they're going, and you move it in that direction because of the clipper ships, because of the ship markers which say this is where you have to go from. They have to either spend for a branch, and there's a limited number of them. Red's got 3, black's got 1. Only one chance to branch the black track at all. So, or routes at all. Anyway, that's what I love about this game, is that this is more intense fighting over the direction of the route than an XX game has. And I really love that about it. It's lacking the stock manipulation. And I always kind of thought, gee, if UP had, kind of a a real stock manipulation system, I'd love it. I actually miss that this doesn't even have the stocks at all. But it's not a simplified XX, and UP wasn't either. It's about the roots. And I had a great time with it before, and I'm hoping to enjoy it solitaire. My wife was not so fond of it. All right, let's put this up.